Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So today I'm working on a little watercolor painting, and I'm also going to be talking about these brushes, which I did get sent to review, but I didn't get paid anything beyond that, so anything else is just entirely my own opinion. I do have a coupon code, so if you are interested in these brushes, you can check that out down in the description. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started on these. So these are Trekell brushes, which I was really excited to try this brand out. There have been several artists that I love watching and they use these brushes, so I was able to finally get a sampling of those. But I'm using 3 different types of brushes and 3 different sizes of each of them. And I'm using the Quill Mop 8000 series for this first set of brushes. And then the next one that I use is the golden Taklon cat's tongue, and that's the shape specifically. And that's a 260 series. And the final brush that I'm going to be using is the Kolinsky round 7000 series. And this very first set of brushes that I used actually contains my all-time favorite brush out of all of these brushes, as well as I think probably most of the brushes that I already own. I think there might be one that beats it out that I already have. But my absolute favorite brush is actually the smallest size of these brushes. And it's actually a 010, I believe, so it's sized in a particular way for these, but I absolutely loved how it handled. It's a very thick, full brush, so it holds a lot of water, but it still goes to a very fine point. I found that this brush was very useful for me doing large washes, where I wanted to get into very small little nooks and crannies where I was, say, painting a background, but I also needed to be able to cover a lot of space very quickly. This really solved an issue where when I go in with small brushes, I have very limited paint that's actually in the brush, so I can't get a lot of area painted down before I have to go back in for more paint, which makes it a lot harder to make sure that it's very continuous and areas aren't drying out. So this one was really perfect for that. I loved it. I definitely need to get a little bit more used to holding the brush though, because the ferrule of the brush is actually this wire that's twisted around it, which I like that it's kind of something different, but I do have a tendency of choking up on the brush, and this one definitely handles better when I'm using about an inch back on the brush handle. And another specific thing that I like about it is that it is synthetic, but it is meant to mimic squirrel hair, and actual natural bristles in brushes are very responsive to the way that your hand changes direction as well as the pressure sensitivities. So I was really excited to use something that wasn't actual animal hair but was meant to have some of those qualities. Since all of my brushes are entirely synthetic, they're very rigid in a way. They spring back into their shape quickly, so they don't have a very supple feel to it, which is something that you will find with your natural hair brushes. So this was a nice medium where I did think that it was very reactive to what I wanted, but it wasn't so loose and floppy almost that it wasn't easy to control. And the next brush that I used is the cat's tongue shaped brush, which I don't know if this is a brush shape that is readily available or if it's specific to Trekell, but I loved it. It was better than a filbert for me, where it came to a really sharp point in the middle of the brush, which allowed me to get into really small areas but then also cover larger areas with them. This one was a really reliable brush. It felt like the brushes that I normally like to use. It is synthetic, so it does have a bounce back quality to it, so it was easy to control. I knew exactly what it was going to do, which I like. And yeah, this full set I think is the one that I'll get the most use out of, because it really is very tied into the way that I like to use my brushes, because it does have a lot of spring back to it and it keeps its shape as soon as I release pressure on it. So it really is very reliable as far as being able to know exactly the type of line work that I'm going to be able to get with it, as well as thicker areas for filling in larger areas with a wash. I can just flatten out the brush, but yeah, so far I've been really happy with also the way that all the bristles conform to the shape. I definitely struggle with other brush brands where they'll have these errant hairs that stick off, and that drives me nuts because it does create much more of a messy brush stroke where I have to be a lot more considerate of that. But these so far have really held up well to that. I've used them a little bit more before it came time to do this video so that I could test them out and see how they lasted for a little bit more usage, and I haven't had any issues with that. And the last set of brushes that I'm using are the Kolinsky round brushes, and I think these ones are the ones that I'm going to need the most practice to be able to get the most out of them. They behave very differently from the synthetic brushes that I'm used to. And this is a synthetic brush as well, but it did feel very supple and responsive. And that is something that I struggled with, being able to control it and know where the bristles were going. So this really isn't a negative against the brush itself, but just something that you need to be aware of when you go into this brush. Some people love brushes that have a very natural hair feel to them or are natural hair, and other people don't like them at all. And I am excited to practice it and get a little bit better at controlling my own hand movements to get the most out of my brushes. So this set is going to have a little bit of a learning curve for me, but they did hold a lot of water, which I think is one of their biggest benefits, is that I could load it up with a lot of paint and be able to get a lot of mileage on my paper, that is, while I'm painting. And that is really, really valuable in watercolor because it allows you to be able to keep your flat washes flat. You won't get as many seams when everything is contained in your brush already, and you don't have to go back for more paint. And like I mentioned, there is a coupon code in the description, and I'll also have it listed out each of the types of brushes that I'm using today. But we can go ahead and jump in and start talking about this piece in and of itself. So this is actually my second try at this painting. I had the line work done and I actually completed the painting, and I did not like the results. I painted it on hot press paper, which is fickle to use. It's definitely not recommended for beginners. I struggle with it quite a bit. It's hard to get flat washes, which sounds opposite of what it seems like it would be. You'd think that a smoother paper, and that's what hot press is, it's a lot smoother. You'd think that that would be equal to smoother washes, but it's not. It actually really magnifies where you have different areas that are drying differently. It makes that a lot more apparent. And I just really fought with it on this, with that particular issue, where I found that the hair and the skin, it just got a really mottled look. And I also ended up putting too many layers trying to correct that. So then it looked really, really muddy, and it just had this awful texture to it. So I decided that I needed to repaint it and start from scratch, except for this time I decided to go with my standard cold press paper. I really would like to be able to get 100% professional at using hot press and be able to use it exactly the way I want it to, but I found that sometimes when I use it, it works great and I get the results that I want, and other times I cannot at all. So I'm still trying to ride that out and figure out how to use it, but since I had a failure, I decided to switch gears and go back in with some cold press paper, something that I could reliably know that I could get my flat washes and build it up the way that I want it to. One thing that I'd like to have tried a different step before I ended up at the final version is actually the leaves that are in front of her face. I eventually end up going in with my silver paint from Cintiq, and I paint that in, and I leave the purple outline, and then I go back in and I add more detailing on top of the silver, which, by the way, looked really cool. It made the purple micron look very metallic, so I loved that effect. But in the end, I decided that the silver was way too pale. It had a very similar value with everything else behind it, so it didn't have the contrast that I wanted, and it was really harder to see than I wanted it to. In my sketches, I had it as very dark, and it would really stand out as a very graphic element to the piece. So in the end, after looking at the silver and deciding for a little while, I went back in over it with my Payne's gray paint and just darkened it to a very almost black paint. But looking back at it, I liked how originally I had drawn the line work first and then outlined where the leaves would be so I'd know where they were. And at the beginning, I figured I was going to be painting it in with an opaque paint anyways. But looking at it, it almost gave it this transparent look. So I think I would have liked to maybe have gone in and inside of the micron pen that I'd put down, I could have gone in with either a gel pen or gouache. And I could have outlined the inside of the micron pen to create a little bit of a buffer between the leaf micron and the background micron. And I think I could have given it more of a transparent look. It would have finished it off a little bit more. And maybe I could have gone in with a wash that colored the inside of the leaves so that it looked almost like colored glass. But At this point, that's all conceptual, where I think it could have looked cool, but it might not have ended up looking the way that I want it to, or it might not have had the contrast that I wanted, and ultimately I may have ended up with the choice that I did choose and I ended up with. But it's always nice to be able to try things out and see if they work. So I think that's something that I'll pay attention to more in the future. I do really like the idea of things being transparent and being able to see the line art through other things or shapes that are created with paint. And that is it for today. I do have a list of the brushes that I used, as well as all the other paints and everything that I used to create this painting, down in the description. And I have a link to my art shop where you can get prints and originals and stickers and buttons and other art goodies. But that is it for me today. So I will be back on Saturday with another painting. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you then.